Most people, if you ask them about taxes, my accountant deals with that. But the amazing thing is the vast majority of accountants either don't know about this or don't know enough about it to recommend it to their clients.
Keith Wasserman said it was like the 10th wonder of the world or something like that. And I was like, what is this cost segregation thing? Welcome to the Real Estate 101 show. I'm your host today, Patrick Donley. And with me today is the king of cost segregation, Yonah Weiss. Yonah, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here. Great to finally talk, Patrick.
Welcome to the show. We were talking a little bit before the podcast started. You are in Israel. Tell us what brought you to Israel and what you're up to there.
Well, it's, really in COVID, I saw a lot of people doing things remotely, and I really have a lot of affinity to the country here. Don't have a lot of family, but just always loved it. And I've been back and forth a ton of times over the last 20 years. And so just kind of decided to make it my own. So the family and I are now here full time.
That's awesome. And what city are you in?
We're in Jerusalem. So the main capital city, biggest city in Israel. And it's an amazing place. And love working remotely because it's, I get the best of both worlds.
That's awesome. And you've got 6 kids. You've got the whole family over there?
Yeah. Good job keeping track.
Yeah. It's hard for you to keep track, I bet.
Not quite. Yeah. But yeah, they're amazing.
I wanted to actually talk about your younger years. You come from a family of teachers. I wanted to talk and learn a little bit about, was money and investing in real estate something that was taught in the household growing up?
Not at all. So I grew up in Southern California and kind of middle-class family. My mother was a teacher. My grandparents on my mother's side were both teachers. My father was, in business. He did a number of different things, but changed career paths. Not really an entrepreneur per se. Had a couple different businesses, but we were taught at a young age to, if we wanted something, we'd have to work for it. And so I had the not necessarily finances, but work ethic and the understanding of money doesn't grow on trees, and we really weren't. I would not say privileged at all. I mean, I went to in the neighborhood we lived was a little more upper middle class, but we were definitely on the lower end of that spectrum. Like all my friends in high school had brand new cars when they were 16 and stuff like that. Definitely not my case. I had a used car that was a hand-me-down from my older brother that, I had to pay for. It was like an 85 Buick Skylark. It was like really, all my friends had brand new, all kinds of stuff. So I definitely had the awareness that, money was an issue, but I never really had any education in terms of saving or financial literacy and that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot of it later in life.
So growing up as a kid, what kind of career aspirations did you have?
I really didn't have any career aspirations. I was a teacher from a young age, like a tutor and a camp counselor and youth group kind of advisor and things like that. So I was always working with kids, always enjoyed teaching. And I went to college for a history degree because I didn't really have any career aspirations. It was like you had to pick a degree. And I was pretty good with remembering names and dates and kind of stuff like that. But I literally had no career aspirations whatsoever. And it was only, and I continued being a teacher just because that was my passion. And I love that. And it was just, so I paid the bills a little bit, but I never had any real aspiration for making money. Like I never, and to this day, I still don't, even though, thank God now I am making a lot of money. I don't have any desire to make more money per se. It's just about having enough to, to help my family just be relatively, everyone has a different level, but we're very frugal. My family should have enough to get by, to have what we need, basic needs. And, what I can give away, it really is really one of my main focuses. So charity and that kind of work is something I focus on extensively.
Yeah, I want to get into your faith later here in the talk, but I read on your website that your grandmother calls teaching the family business.
That's what she used to say.
That's really cool. And so, that's been a big part of your life. So what you mentioned history, what was the focus of your studies? And then I'm curious how you've been able to bring that into the real estate world, how it's impacted how you just operate in the business world.
So I never really had a focus in history. You have to pick a focus a little bit. And I actually took a year abroad to study in Israel, which is where I kind of grew my love for the country and my first time visiting. And so I did more of a focus on Jewish history. Uh, did a lot of studies in that, both in San Diego, where I went to college, and in Israel on that year abroad. But because of, I just have a really good memory for names and places. Like if I meet someone, for example, I'll remember them, even if it's years and years later. A very good memory for that. So that's actually helped me tremendously on social media as well, because it's hard for people to keep track. But for me, it's actually pretty easy, because if we met or we had a conversation, I'll remember you and remember your name and remember some details about you. It's just kind of a natural gift that I have. So for me, that was just, history was the easiest thing that I could do just because of that. And again, didn't really have any focus in doing anything with it other than just getting a degree, which ironically, I had no use for or desire for after, and actually was not even in the country when to attend graduation, and had my diploma sent to my parents' house. And I don't think I've even seen it to this day. So hasn't really helped me.
That's funny. So I know you like, on your podcast, you like to ask some questions. And one of them is like the worst job somebody's had. What were some of those early jobs, like during college or after college? What did your early career look like?
Yeah, I had kind of odds and ends of jobs from the time I was in, high school. Again, most of them were, I was a camp counselor, I was a youth advisor, I was a tutor, after school and that kind of stuff. So those were things that I actually really enjoyed, although some of them were pretty difficult. But one summer I had a horrible experience working at a magazine in the advertising department. So I'd have to like cold call people, trying to get them to advertise in this free publication that was put out, people pick up at grocery stores and those kind of things. This was, 20, 25 years ago. So that was a really common thing. People didn't, go on the internet and stuff like that to scroll as much, but it was horrible. I worked there for maybe like 8 weeks, and I hated it like every single day. Not so much, the cold calling was something I didn't enjoy, but it was really the environment of the people. It was just a toxic kind of people that I said to myself, I do not want to ever have to go into sales ever again in my life, because just the people that were there. There were a couple of people that were really great, like the manager and the editor of the magazine, really great people, had great conversations with them. But some of the other salespeople were like, chain smokers and, yelling on the phone or whatever, that slam the phone down and then stuff like that. I'm just like, that's not an environment I wanted to be in.
And how old were you at this time?
I think I was probably 19 or 20. It was on a college. It was summer breaking during college.
Okay. And then you started a nonprofit. Talk to me a little bit about the nonprofit and what you did with that.
Well, I had, as a teacher, I actually had some financial struggles as well along the years, and saw that there were many other people. And in fact, I had a really kind of health crisis in my family that was the impetus for me kind of switching career paths. But even before that, I had seen other people in my community and people that I knew that had struggled with things that happened, a death in the family or health, sickness, or just losing a job, things like that, where people were struggling financially. And I wanted to be able to help, and you just help people in my community and people that I knew. And so we started this nonprofit really to raise funds to help people get through difficult times. Simple as that. Providing meals, providing clothing and vouchers and things like that, where people would be a little bit too embarrassed to come and ask for it. But you can, if you have a relationship with people, you can kind of tell when someone's struggling. And so that's what I did. It was a really amazing thing. It lasted for many years. I handed it off to someone else, and when I kind of went more full time into real estate, but still helped support that and countless other organizations.
That's awesome. Was that a full-time thing that you did? I mean, was the bulk of your time spent on the nonprofit?
No, it was not full time. It was more, it was a volunteer type thing. I definitely sometimes I would travel, probably like once every 6 to 8 weeks or so, to travel, just to go around doing some fundraising and stuff like that. So during those times, at a week at a time, every couple of months, that was full time. but the rest of the time, it was kind of more a part-time thing.
That's awesome. And the nonprofit is still operating today?
To a certain extent, not the same level that it was when I was running it, but it's still functioning.
That's cool. That's cool. So at what point did the real estate bug bite you, and what was the inspiration for that? Talk to us how that came about.
It was I don't want to say by accident because I believe everything happens for a reason. And so I see more of divine providence. But like I said, I kind of had a family health crisis. And without getting into too many details on that, it really kind of shook me up. And I had debt. I had consumer debt, I had student loan debt still. And we're struggling, month to month to really, teacher salary. Love what I was doing, love spending time with the family, but was not really making it. And I never really thought about it too much because I never had a drive to make money or to be have any financial independence or anything like that. It really wasn't something I was taught at a young age, and so I was getting by, living very frugally, and but this kind of shook us up and incurred many extra costs. I was like, okay, I need to figure something out, and so it was almost by accident. I reached out to many friends of mine. This is about 8 years ago. What should I do? I'm open to some other, maybe part-time or full-time just opportunities. And real estate kept coming up in conversation with people that I knew. So I reached out to some friends and family members that I knew were successful and just said, hey, what should I do? And a lot of them pointed me in the direction of real estate. And that's really where I just started. Okay, let's do it. It happened to run into a friend of mine in a parking lot one day and suggested, he was a mortgage broker. He was a property manager. He owned some rental, multifamily rental properties on his own, and his family did for years, and had a lot of experience in the commercial real estate industry. I knew nothing. And I sat down with him for, a couple hours one day. We're just talking, and he was teaching me all these different things about mortgages and about financing and all that stuff. I was just fascinated because it was all brand new to me at the time. And one thing led to another, and ended up just working, interning basically for him, working side by side with him and learning a tremendous amount over about an 8-month period.
Was that in New York, or where was that?
So actually that was in Israel also. I was in Israel at the time. Yeah. And so, kind of back and forth a lot over the years, but it was pretty incredible. So we were working again, kind of remotely in the US, and I found a passion for it and found really found Bigger Pockets at that time. And it was still in the early stages of Bigger Pockets, and found some other platforms, and was really just connecting with a lot of people in the real estate industry and just fascinated how people could make money. And really there was almost seemingly no ceiling, no limit to that. And there was so much knowledge and information out there that I really assimilated quite a bit just due to my teaching background, that I was like, okay, I can do this. And one thing led to another. I did a bunch of other things during that time, some fix and flips, and some, did some real estate brokerage as well, just learning how to find properties and learn how to read, things like the GIS and stuff like that, just figuring out the city plans and looking through them. There was so much knowledge out there. I was just taking in everything.
So I want to take a step back. You mentioned that you don't believe that there are any accidents, that everything's kind of God ordained, or however you want to phrase it.
Right.
In my research, I believe I came across this story. You were reading 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Is that correct? And can you go into that story about you were studying that, and then you know what I'm implying here, but I'd like to hear that. It was a great story, and I'd like to hear it.
That was a great story, yeah. So, and as you said, one of the first business books that I ever read was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it was all the things that were in there were things that I felt were, to me at least, self-evident. But he just arranged it in such a way that was really powerful, really moving. But one thing that I had not really come across beforehand was this concept of synergy. And obviously that's the 6th habit, is one of the things that brings everything together. And so I was reading about this synergy, and literally at that time was, doing the mortgage brokerage with my friend, and was still open to opportunities, and saw a sign for a company called Synergy Real Estate. And I took that as, a really eye-opening sign. It was oh, very interesting. Synergy Real Estate. I wonder what that's about. And, I said hiring agents, and I was okay, let me give this guy a call. And literally I did. I went down the next day in his office, met him. Really cool guy, young guy, about 24, 25 years old at the time. And he was crushing it in real estate, had made, a lot of money in brokerage, working for someone else, started his own company. And he also named the company Synergy based on the 7 habits. And I was wow, this is really, and we ended up hitting it off, becoming really good friends. I ended up working for him as a broker and learning that side of the business. And that really opened up a lot of opportunities to me. And we ended up becoming partners and doing a couple of deals together as well. So it was really amazing just from that one. It's what I saw was when you're reading something, and this is a really incredible concept in psychology, you may have come across things like all the time, but you may never have noticed it. But when you learn something new, your mind focuses on that thing. And so you'll end up seeing those things. And I forget the actual technical
I think it's the reticular activating system.
That's correct. Yeah. That's exactly right. So like you're looking to buy a new car, for example, and you come across this, I don't know, the Toyota Sienna, just like a minivan. You're like, okay, that's a great car. But you never looked at it before. All of a sudden you start seeing them everywhere. Right. And that's just an incredible thing.
Yeah. And I don't know. I love that. Just the clues that God or the universe gives to you. Like if you're aware, they're out there, and it's cool that you made the step and talked to that guy, introduced yourself, and had a relationship with him. I wanted to talk about it sounded like you worked for about 8 or 9 months with a gentleman. Were you just kind of sitting with him, shadowing him? Were you working for free? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so I was shadowing him. I was learning from him. It was someone that he had, a decade of experience or more in real estate. And literally I would sit with him in his office every day for, I don't even remember how long every day, but it was like, easily 4 or 5 hours. Just learning from him. We started doing cold calls. He was doing mortgage financing, brokerage, and he was doing his own things on the side also. So he'd have, calls. He had some property that the pipe burst, and he had to call the property manager. And so I was literally learning from him every step of the way. But the main thing we were doing was, brokering loans. So it was regular traditional commercial financing, as well as hard money loans. So that was eye-opening as well. So we're dealing on the commercial side as well as the residential side. I just remember calling, banks, like cold calling banks and researching like which bank in this city, local banks, and things like that, who we talk to, and just get them on the phone, get term sheets and all kinds of stuff like that. So it was really fun. And it was, I was literally working for free. So I was working on commission. If we ended up closing something, I'd originate tons and tons of loans. We ended up closing something. Obviously I get a commission on that. So, but I was doing it more than anything for the experience and just for the knowledge.
And you had the experience with the magazine earlier when you were in your late, 18, 19, or 20. And so, you weren't shy to cold call, right?
I wasn't shy to it, but I also learned a little more about it just through him in terms, and something that I, apply even now still today, which is not just blind cold calling, right? Not just taking a list and just calling people. That's what I despise. And I think everyone can relate to that in terms of either receiving or making those calls, but it's more about an educated cold call. You find out more information, and the more information you have, the more you can make that connection with the person on the other line. And so that's what I did, a lot of research before actually reaching out to call people. So, I'd go online and research this bank, for example, and look at all their products and, all the things. And I come to them and say, hey, listen, we have, a Rite Aid in that neighborhood where you're in. This is the length of the lease. This is et cetera. And, do you have a term sheet? Can you provide something? I see your program for this X, Y, and Z. So obviously it was, cold calling, but again, with a lot more background and knowledge.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really good advice too, to handle cold calls in a way that you're educating, you're teaching, and it's kind of like your strong point in many ways. It's what you're,
it's also, you appreciate, if you get a cold call from someone and they know more about you, like this conversation, right, Patrick, you've done your research on this podcast, which I can't say is the same with, hundreds of other podcasts I've done. You obviously take the time to get to know someone and do your research before even interviewing them, which I love. And so too, if you get a cold call and someone calls you and they know that you have XYZ business and your pain points are this, and they know that they can provide something to help with, you'll be much more receptive to that call than someone that just calls them like, are you a business owner? No, thank you, wrong number. Goes a long way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good advice. Good points. So you mentioned a few fix and flips that you did. Was that your first real estate investments that you did? And was that, was that? Those
are in New Jersey, in Irvington and West Orange, New Jersey.
Uh-huh. And how did those go? Was it something you enjoyed or not so much?
Not so much.
What about
Not
it did you not like?
not so much. It just wasn't my skill set. It was like
Yeah.
you hear these things, you see bigger pockets, and you hear all the these different shows and stuff like that. It's like, oh yeah, so easy to do. And I had a friend who was also had never done it before, but knew other people that did, and he ended up meeting someone that had a really close tie to the sheriff's auction in that county. And he said, we can get properties before they go to auction, so like really, really dirt cheap. And I was like, okay, that sounds like great. And then he was showing me all these different things, someone I really trusted. So I was like, okay, let's, we can do this together. And the things that I didn't, so there were things that were great about it, but there were things that I didn't like with, specifically just dealing with contractors, dealing with delays and things that were unexpected, that were totally out of your control. I like to have a little more control and investment. And when something's totally out of your hands, it's like, that's not really a solid investment strategy. So that's one thing that I definitely, if you're doing all the work yourself, it can be much more fulfilling, but I wasn't, and I didn't enjoy that aspect of the business. So we had delays, we had change orders, we had all kinds of stuff, which contractors are notorious for. And on the first deal that we did, it ended up sitting, even though we finished it and completed it, ended up sitting on the market for like 6 months. And so that just killed the returns. All right. I mean, the whole business plan was to have it, flip within 90 days and then have the capital reinvested, et cetera. And so having it sit, twice or more than twice as long than we had expected really killed a lot of the metrics.
What was the reason that it sat so long? Was it just overpriced or?
I honestly don't think it was overpriced. You never know what the reason is. I think maybe to me, my real reason is that this was kind of God's way of telling me, don't do this. Like, this is not for you. This is, don't waste your time doing this. So that was my takeaway.
Yeah. So what happened next? You still wanted to stay in real estate even after the fix and flip experience. What happened next?
I ended up, was just open to opportunities. Was still doing some brokerage, but had an introduction to this company, Madison Commercial Real Estate, based out of Lakewood, New Jersey. Really great company, title company. And they had this cost segregation division. I didn't know much about it at all, but was made the introduction. They were looking for someone to do, business development. And I was like, okay, yeah, listen, why not? It's a great introduction. I was open to opportunities, and I ended up just interviewing, taking the job, and really the rest is history, like I like to say.
I want to hear more about that. How did you sell them on yourself to hire you as the business development guy? You didn't have an accounting background. You had a little bit of real estate experience.
Right.
I just want to hear how you talked your way into the job.
Sure. Fascinatingly enough, the little bit of real estate experience that I had was apparently enough to convince them. That and the teaching background is something that I found was, they were looking to have someone give webinars and do stuff like that and write some articles. And so that was something that I could do. And I really went out of my way to show them that I could do, what they were looking for and more. And I think they were just kind of impressed by me. I had, obviously a background in teaching for many years. And so that really, I think, was the clincher more than anything else.
And we're going to get into cost segregation here shortly. It's definitely something that needs to be taught. And I'm eager to be taught here today as well, because it's relatively new to me. So I wanted to talk first, though, about at the beginning of your podcast, you say that your network is your net worth. Talk to me exactly what you mean by that and why you chose to put that at the beginning of each episode.
It's a great question. I think that it's something that always stood out to me. And the more I got into real estate, the more opportunities opened up to me because of that network. And so it doesn't mean literally, your network is your net worth. Obviously, you can't put that on your balance sheet, the number of friends that you have. But Jim Rohn or Zig Ziglar, one of the two, or both of them were famous for saying, you are the 5 people that you surround yourself most with. And I truly, firmly believe that if you want to be something, surround yourself with other people that have already done that, and you will end up doing that same thing as well, because they'll push you, whether it means, physically, they'll test your limits, but just being around them, hopefully you'll be inspired and be driven to do more than you're currently doing. So social media has really, over the past, 5, 6 years that I've been involved in this business, has really opened up opportunities to me beyond measure, really. And I know that's kind of cliche, but it has. I can't even imagine where I'd be right now without the people that I've met literally through social media, that many, hundreds literally have become friends and met in person and have really taken my life in the business perspective to a whole different level that I never even conceived of. And so the fact that I've, invested in multiple limited partner opportunities in multifamily and self-storage, RV parks, mobile home parks, these many different asset classes that I knew nothing about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And so I learned about those through my network. And so literally my net worth is because, a byproduct of that.
I could take this in a lot of different directions at this point, but you started off, and I wanted to talk about social media later, but since you brought it up, let's get into it now. You started off primarily focusing on LinkedIn. Is that right? And
That's
just
correct,
have
yes.
recently gotten into real estate Twitter. Talk to us about like the differences that you find in versus LinkedIn versus Twitter. What's the pros and cons of each?
I started on LinkedIn almost by accident about 5 years ago. Again, I was just prospecting, looking for people, and just the one thing that I found, an amazing thing about LinkedIn, is that if you, and I recommend anyone to do this right now, if you have a LinkedIn account, go ahead and type your name into Google. Okay, if you don't have an extremely common name, then guaranteed that your LinkedIn page will come up, if not the first, in the first five search inquiries of Google search. Okay, that means your name. So nowadays, if anyone is looking for you or looking to do business with you or anything, they're going to Google your name. That's simple fact. What happens when they Google name? They'll learn about you. Yes, your social media files, even if they're not so active, will show up there. The more active you are on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, those will show up towards the top of the search. But LinkedIn, even if you're not active, and that's the amazing thing that I found, it will still come up at the top of the search query. Now, your LinkedIn profile, and so I ended up just like stumbling upon it because I was looking to, searching for people. I had an account for many, many years, but it was just like, college friends. It was a place to post resumes and place to get a job. But what I found about 5 years ago, there was a transition after Microsoft bought LinkedIn, was that it became much more of a social media content sharing platform, but it was still very professional and business oriented. And so that was the main thing that attracted me. I knew, I wasn't on any of the other platforms, didn't have a Facebook account, Instagram, anything like that, not even Twitter. But LinkedIn, I found was, okay, I had an account because, I had friends that I connected with. And now I kept finding people sharing educational and inspirational content. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe this can work. And so I just literally started posting content, just educational stuff, and found people were connecting and people were resonating with that and making connections. I ended up being invited on a podcast, my first podcast through that. And that really snowballed everything from there. And so I've built, 25,000 followers on LinkedIn, and it's been an amazing community that I found through that, specifically in the real estate space. And, created a podcast, been on guests, again, 400 guesting appearances. And most recently, someone pointed out to me, there's this thing called retweet, right? Real estate Twitter, which I didn't even know was a thing. And someone, tagged me or something one time. I opened an account many years ago. No, not many, like 3-4 years ago, and ended up just looking at it one time. Someone tagged me, and I got a notification. So like I went, checked it out. I was like, oh, interesting. These are some people that I know from LinkedIn who are over here. And they're like, it's so much better here on Twitter because there's so much more kind of community and discussion, as opposed to LinkedIn, where there's a lot of downsides to LinkedIn as well. There's spam in the inbox and that kind of stuff, but there's less of discussion sometimes on a specific topic. Whereas the retweet has a lot more of that kind of back and forth discussion from many, many different perspectives in the industry. LinkedIn is still great to make incredible connections, to post content, to have those kind of interactions in your community. And there are discussions, don't get me wrong, but it's less involved. I mean, it's rare to have like a thread, have a post, and then have a discussion back and forth, more than 4 or 5 comments back and forth between one person. In Twitter, you can have, hundreds of back and forths, and that's really an amazing thing.
So you're a couple months into Twitter. Do you focus your time equally on them? Or are you leaning more towards Twitter at this point? How do you spend a lot of time on your social media network? How much time? I want to know. I need to tell my wife this because I spend a lot of time as well. And I said, it's work, honey. You need to understand it. I'm working.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. If it is work and you are getting what you intend to get out of it, then it doesn't make a difference if that's your platform for outreach versus email or cold calls. I find that for outreach, especially for people in sales or business development, social media is the best way to use in marketing, and I'm a huge proponent of that. So how many hours a day? Many hours a day. I mean, I've scheduled calls and podcasts and all kinds of stuff like that throughout the day, but basically any in between time, my social channels are open and I'm there commenting or posting.
Yeah. We talked about the network is your net worth. What are some ways and advice you have for somebody new getting involved in real estate to start building their network?
Social media. I mean, that's really it. Like, find people that you aspire to be, learn from them, connect with them. If you can meet people in person, that's great. But nowadays, there are plenty of online networking events, like Zoom events, like I have every week. And I've done this since the onset of COVID. We started a weekly meetup on Zoom where we have a guest speaker come in and then breakout rooms in Zoom where we have networking. You get to know people. And so there are plenty of those out there. You can meet people in the industry. You never know where. I've literally had people on my meetup find new jobs or find partners and investors, and literally from just connecting with people through these channels. And yeah, I mean, it's great if you can go to in-person meetups in your town, real estate meetups. They exist everywhere, right? But if you don't have to limit it to your town. You can do it online anywhere. And so that's the first advice I would say. Just connect with people, make those relationships, and then keep educating yourself. Be humble. Don't think that everything. You know more than you actually know, because the smartest people that I know are people that constantly are learning and constantly think the more that they know, the less that they know. Meaning, the more that learn, the more you actually learn how much there is to know and how little of that you actually know.
Yeah, I love that. I wanted to ask you too about, you said you're the average of the 5 people that you are around. Does that include books, social media? Do you consider that it can include that as well?
To a certain extent, I think it really has a lot to do with kind of personal, people rub off on you when you surround yourself with people. So yes, you can, if you're an introvert and not really talking to people, then yeah, probably the people you're surrounding with are not real people, or, online or, or books and things like that, podcasts. But, it has a lot more impact when you actually spend time with people in person.
Yeah. I want to hear a little bit about how you've done a great job at building both your LinkedIn and Twitter following. What kind of advice do you have for people to build a following?
It really comes down to 2 components, any social media. Number one is find the right people that you want in your network and engage with their posts and engage with them, right? And what does that mean, engage with? It means adding relevant either questions or valuable comments in their own posts. And so that's something that anyone can do. So a lot of people struggle with social media, like, how do I don't know what to post. I don't know what to post. And that's a huge struggle. And I totally relate with that. That's the second step, is getting over that and just, hunkering down and posting. What can you post? There's so much information. The way that I view social media in terms of posting is just sharing your journey or sharing what you're doing. So great example of that, a podcast, right? I can do a post right now that I had this great podcast with, the Real Estate 101 podcast with Patrick. And it was amazing. And that is a social media post. Yeah, sure. It's not adding tremendous amount of value, but when the podcast goes live and we can share, some clips from that, hopefully that will be adding more value. If you know something, it doesn't matter what that is, share that or ask questions. And that could be a great post. So again, there's 2 components. One is engaging with the right people and growing your following that way, and growing your network through that. And the second thing is posting original, valuable content over and over again. And I know a lot of people struggle with that. So I'm not going to sit here and say it's easy, but once you get used to it, it just comes naturally for a lot of you. And you will learn a tremendous amount. My writing and my communication has gotten so much better just through using social media.
And has your business taken off because of social media as well?
Tremendously. I mean, I like to say 10x, it's like more like 100x.
Wow.
Yeah, directly impacted.
That's crazy. I want to get now into what you're known for, which is cost segregation. You are known as the cost seg king, and I've been investing in real estate for, quite a while. And cost segregation just came into my awareness probably within the last 6 or 7 months, largely through real estate Twitter. I think Keith Wasserman said it was like the 10th wonder of the world or something like that. And I was like, what is this cost segregation thing? So I want to get into that. Can you explain to us really simply what cost segregation is and then how you became an expert on it?
Sure. So cost segregation is an advanced form of depreciation. So depreciation is a tax deduction that anyone who owns a property, a rental or investment property, so it doesn't apply to your primary residence, but any investment property, the government actually allows you to take an income tax deduction called depreciation based on the purchase price of that property. So you can literally write off the value of what was paid for that property over a 27.5-year or 39-year period. So that's called your depreciation deduction. And again, I say it's based on, it's called depreciation because it's based on the principle that things go down in value as time goes on, but it's not actually happening because it's not intrinsic to the property. It's specifically to the taxpayer. So the depreciation on the property starts over, that 27.5 years starts over every time it's transacted and changes hands.
And so just real quick, the 27.5 years, that's for residential, correct? And the 39 is for commercial?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so kind of arbitrary numbers, but that, is what the rules say. So there are actually different schedules that certain components of a property depreciate on faster 5 or 7 or 15-year schedules. And that's where cost segregation comes in. It used to be called component depreciation, which essentially is what it sounds like. You can depreciate certain components like furniture or fixtures of the property over a 5-year schedule. So now they call it cost segregation. We take that cost that was paid for the property and we segregate it and break it down into different components, into different buckets that through an engineering breakdown of the property, we can see, the furniture or the cabinets or the carpeting, all depreciated on a 5-year schedule. The value is X. And so now we can take the value of those components as a deduction over a 5-year period instead of just lumping everything together over a 27.5-year period. So it's a cash flow mechanism, essentially allowing you to take bigger deductions in the earlier years of ownership.
I love following the stock market and learning about investing concepts, but sometimes I fall victim to information overload. That happens to you too, right? I'm not alone here. Hundreds of new headlines from CNBC, Forbes, and Twitter all pulling for my attention every hour. How are we supposed to know what's important when everything is made to seem important? Thankfully, you can read our free newsletter. It only takes about 5 minutes to read per day. We curate the most important topics in the financial world each day and deliver them straight to your email inbox. Join over 30,000 readers now by simply clicking the link in the pop-up in this video and then entering your email. It is that simple. Just click the link in the pop-up, enter your email, and start knowing what's happening with your money.
When you're talking to real estate investors, what kind of percentage, roughly speaking, would you say know about cost segregation versus those that don't?
Well, I mean, this really is going to come to answer the second question that you had previously, is how I became the expert in the field. And because I was fascinated when I got involved in it, I had reached out to everyone that I knew that was in real estate previously. And I found that, I just asked them, what do you know about cost segregation? And I got primarily 2 answers. Okay. There are 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. One answer was, yes, this is great. It's an awesome thing. We use it. And the other answer I got from everyone else, which was the vast majority, was, I've never even heard of this. Okay. So there was almost no middle ground of people that, we know about it, but don't really use it. And this is something that I literally every single time I give a presentation in person or on a webinar is I ask this question, what is your familiarity with cost segregation? A, the first time you're hearing of it, B, I've heard of it, but don't really understand it. C, I know really well, I've used it, etc. So the vast majority, I'd say still to this day, about 80% of any group that I speak to is in that first category of either they've never heard of it or they've heard of it but don't understand it. And so that to me, at the beginning and still to this day, really has been my, I guess, a blessing for me, is because, hey, I'm just a teacher. That's all I'm doing. I'm just educating people about this. And once you learn about it, for most people, it's almost a no-brainer to use it. And so selling a service, which is essentially what we're doing because our company provides this service, we're the biggest national company doing this, is the way that people end up using the service is first learning about it. And once you know what it is, then it's almost a no-brainer to do it.
Why do you think it's so little known? Why is it seems crazy that more people don't know about it and utilize it?
I've done my best over the past, 5-6 years to educate the masses about this, but my theory is that it has something to do with taxes. And for most people, if you ask them about taxes or mention anything about taxes, their brains kind of shut off. And for whatever reason, like, okay, taxes, my accountant deals with that. But the amazing thing is that the vast majority of accountants either don't know about this or don't know enough about it to recommend it to their clients. And that may be for, like I said, maybe they just don't know or don't understand enough, or they're not proactive. They're not tax advisors per se. They're people that are putting in numbers. And that's what the majority of accountants are. And so that, to me, that's a combination where the investors themselves don't know what it is, and they rely on anything that's tax related. They assume that their accountant is going to take care of that for that. But on the accounting side, they're not proactive to necessarily tell their clients about all the different options that they do have. And so you just end up with this void. And that's really where I came in, and hopefully have been able to spread the knowledge.
Yeah, I had the same experience with my accountant this past tax season. I asked him, what cost segregation was, and he kind of gave an explanation, not very clear, but I kind of was wondering, like, why have we not discussed this before? Like, why hasn't this even been brought up as at least a consideration to look into? But it sounds like a lot of accountants just don't know about it or don't know how to do it. Would you say that's true? Like, a lot of accountants don't know how to do a cost segregation study?
Well, that's part of it because it can't be done by accountants.
It cannot be done.
Correct. So 99% of accounting firms cannot do this in-house because it does require an engineering component to it. And so in the IRS guidelines, the Cost Segregation Audit Techniques Guide, it clearly says this, cost segregation must be done. A quality cost segregation must be done by someone who has experience in construction and engineering. And so even if and there are, the large accounting firms, the Big Four and, Big 10, whatever, they all have engineers in-house and provide this for their clients. So I'm not saying that no one does this, but the vast majority of accountants, because it requires that kind of third party or engineering component to it, they're not doing it on their own. And so that's really been a big, restraint, if you will, for accountants to do this because, hey, this is out of my wheelhouse. I need to go to a third party or engineer. And so that's already out of my wheelhouse. I'll focus on what I can do personally.
So when you're doing your business development, are you reaching out more to real estate investors, or are you also reaching out to accountants to educate them to say, hey, here's what we do, send your clients our way, we can do this study for them?
It's a combination, and we have people in our company that focus on the accountant outreach. For a while, I was giving CPE courses, which is the continued education for CPAs that they need to, in order to retain your CPA, certified public accounting license. You need to take a certain number of hours of courses every single year to renew that. And so, one of the things that I was doing was working on giving these courses and providing these credits, and needed accreditation, et cetera. But we went through that process. And I would be teaching and giving webinars to accountants or in-person events to accountants and teaching about cost segregation. And again, the same percentage, literally, among the accountants, when I'd asked that question at the beginning is, what's your experience with cost segregation? And the vast majority didn't know what it was or knew very little about it. And so, yes, there is that component, but I personally try to focus on educating real estate investors just because it's a much more, first of all, it's a network that the people that I get along with a lot more. Candidates tend to be a little more boring. Entrepreneurs tend to be a little more exciting, and great personalities match my personality a little bit better. And so that's where I've been focusing on, and especially podcasting. And so that's to me, has been probably the biggest growth vehicle for myself, just reaching the more people possible. Being on the Bigger Pockets podcast, that was very, obviously eye-opening to the people that, I reached through that.
So you offer a free 15-minute consultation. What does that phone call look like if I were to call you?
Typically, I like it's, for someone that has a property or they have, something under contract, or they're looking to understand more about cost segregation from an action standpoint. Like that consultation is usually, we like to also run the numbers, a free feasibility analysis on any property. So usually I'll try to combine them both. If someone schedules a call, I'll ask them, hey, thanks for scheduling. Would you, be interested in a free analysis on any property? And so the call can be a little more directed. A lot of it, again, it's just education. People have questions, and they're mostly the same questions over and over again. So, I've created some content that I can point them to, but it's really just getting to know people. Everyone has their story, and everyone has their business model. And people have, some specific questions. And for me, it's more about getting to know the person, because that is usually what's going to encourage them to do cost segregation or not, is based on their personal situation. So there's, things like the real estate professional status, and, for short-term rentals, there's specific rules regarding that. And so I want to get to know, is this, can you even use these deductions if you get a cost segregation study done? And so that's really usually one of the first parts of the conversation. If we get past that, then we can talk about the real numbers and how this can actually benefit you.
So are there some properties that benefit more from a cost segregation study than others? And what would those be?
Certainly, yeah. Certain types of properties, on the high end, you're looking at like gas stations, car washes. Those can be all literally cost segregated, the entire value of those. But then you'll have things like mobile home parks or RV parks. Part of the reason why I've invested in those assets is because the large amount of accelerated depreciation, the cost segregation, because the majority of what you're buying there is land improvements. And so land itself doesn't depreciate, but what's on top of the land does, like concrete, pavement, asphalt, landscaping, fencing, signage, all that stuff has value to it. And when we assign a value to those components, you can now take the value of those, 15-year depreciation at a faster rate. And with this thing called bonus depreciation, you can actually take the entire accelerated depreciation in the first year. And so that's been a huge benefit for the past few years. And so those are probably the properties that are on the higher end of cost segregation. So
I want to kind of slow down a little bit. The non-structural things that can be used in a cost segregation study, what are some of those things? Let's say I own an office building, which I do. I just bought an office building. What are the things that I can write off in a 5-year period versus the 39-year period?
Yeah. So there's really two categories. There's the 5-year, which is considered personal property or tangible property. And then there's a 15-year, which is land improvement. So I mentioned some of those before. In office buildings, you're going to have a parking lot. You're going to have, signage, landscaping. And so all the value of that, it's going to go in a 15-year schedule. The majority is always going to be in the 5-year, which can include things like furniture, fixtures, window treatments. In an office building, you'll have telecom systems. You'll have security cameras. You'll have light fixtures and things like that. Wall, if there are movable partitions, in a lot of office spaces, you'll have movable partitions. Those are also all considered 5-year property. Flooring, if it's vinyl flooring or carpeting, wall coverings, all of these things I'm mentioning and many more all fit into that 5-year category. And so we're going to have sometimes 20 or 30% of the total building cost is going to fit into these faster depreciation categories and can get, like I said, much larger deductions in those earlier years.
What's a cost segregation study cost? Does it depend on I would imagine the size of the building, or what's an average range for a study?
It does depend on the size. It's not contingent on the cost of the building or the amount of tax savings. That's actually not proper to do because the IRS, frowns upon that. In fact, it's not officially illegal, but people have been slapped with punishments and penalties for doing it like that. So yes, it is contingent solely on the size and the type of the property. I'd say the average, it's somewhere between, I'd say $4,000 to $10,000 for most types of properties. The larger the property, the more obviously, the more work there is. Because again, it does require an engineer to actually study each unit, especially in an office building or retail property. They're going to go into each and every single suite or unit to see how the differences are. Whereas a multifamily property, for example, they only need to go into one of each unit type and they can use all the rest just to extrapolate that.
If you're doing a value add deal, at what point does it make sense to do the cost segregation study at the time of acquisition or after the renovation has been completed, or both?
It's a really, it depends. That's really the answer. It depends on a lot of things, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to cover all of that in this conversation. But most people like to get it done in the beginning at the acquisition stage, so you can capture everything in the property as is and can accelerate depreciation over those. Once you've done renovations, you can actually, many cases, then capture the depreciation amount of those renovations and take consideration on that as well. So it can be done in 2 stages. But again, it will depend on many circumstances.
Okay. You mentioned bonus depreciation. Explain that a little bit more and some of the tax changes that are taking place that will affect bonus depreciation in the future.
Yeah. In the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it's back in 2017, there was a change to the rule that instead of just taking regular cost segregation, which is 5-year, 15-year, 39-year schedules, and taking some of those accelerated amounts over those faster respective years, bonus depreciation, 100% bonus depreciation came into the books in 2018, saying that you have the option, once you've done a cost segregation study, you have the option to take those faster depreciation schedules in the first year, 100% of those deductions in year 1. So that's called 100% bonus depreciation, has been a game changer for many, many people over the years. In 2023, and was written in the books when they passed this law, it's starting to sunset. So it's going to start phasing out by 20% each year. So in 2023, it's only 80% bonus depreciation, and then next year 60, et cetera. What that means is once you do a cost seg study, you can take 80% of those accelerated deductions in the first year. The remaining 20% can still be spread out over those 5 and 15-year schedules. So it's not going to be as advantageous as it was last year and previous years, but still extremely beneficial.
Will that affect your business at all as it reduces in the bonus depreciation? Do you think that will affect business for you guys?
I don't think so. I think to the contrary, people who may not have considered cost seg before, just because of the current environment, people trying to get as many tax deductions as they can to kind of cover maybe for other decreases in income and things like that. So it may have an effect, but like I said before, cost segregation was around for a long time before this bonus depreciation came into the books and was extremely beneficial beforehand. So I think it will continue to be so even as bonus depreciation phases out.
Interesting. I wanted to talk about your podcast. I'm relatively new to doing podcasts. You're maybe my, 20th interview, 15th or 20th, somewhere like that. So, but you've done over, I think 300 or 400 episodes. You've done on your own podcast, Weiss Advice, over 300 episodes. What got you into doing podcasts? What's it been like for you? Why'd you start it? And what's it been like?
So after being a guest on so many podcasts for a couple of years, I really enjoyed this kind of back and forth, enjoyed the conversations and the education, but I also wanted to learn as well. And like I said, I really enjoyed this kind of platform. And so I, for a long time, was thinking about starting my own podcast just to interview other people. And it took me a while to launch it, but eventually I did. And that's correct, over 300 episodes to date on the Weiss Advice podcast. And it's more than anything just been an opportunity for me to get to know people better and kind of strengthen that relationship. I'm sure you can tell when you have this conversation with someone, it's now like a whole new level of relationship. It's very difficult, I find, and people can probably attest to this. If you want to take someone out to coffee or just get on a Zoom call and talk for, half an hour with some random person, they're probably going to say no, right? But if you offer them to be on a podcast, they're likely going to say yes. And so it's really an opportunity more than anything else for that connection between the guest and the host more than it is for the audience. That's what I found.
And what kind of topics do you like to cover for our audience?
So my approach is actually not to look at it in topics, but in people. And so I approach people that I know that are successful in real estate, and 90% or more of the guests I've had on my podcast are actually clients of mine that are real estate investors that have done cost seg. And so I already have that rapport with them. They are very successful people. And so for me, it's more about just interviewing them, hearing their story, as opposed to, speaking about a specific topic. each one will have their niche and we'll end up talking about, a topic or two anyways. But again, it's not focused on the topic, more on the person.
Do you have any advice for how to be a great guest and a great host? I mean, you've done both. So let's hear some advice on being a great guest and a great host.
Well, a couple things I would say, just, no brainers. Make sure to have good sound setup. So, it doesn't cost a lot to get a professional microphone. I mean, I still have a pretty relatively cheap one. This is the, Blue Yeti. It's like $300-400. It's not, not high quality at all. In fact, I'm probably getting a new one shortly, but that's one thing. And that's really simple. But being a good guest is just being open to conversation and not trying to lead the conversation in one direction or another. I've been on plenty of podcasts as a guest, then they'll prepare the questions beforehand. And I'm totally fine with that. I love that. I'm pretty versatile, but don't try to lead it in the direction that you want to lead it in. Rather, just kind of go with the flow and see where it takes you.
Yeah, that's good advice. Love it. I read an acronym that you have. It's called HOPE. And I wanted to talk more about the role of faith for you, which is super important. And you talk openly about it, which I really admire. Talk to us what the acronym HOPE is, and then how just your faith affects your business life.
HOPE, and I learned this from a friend of mine, actually someone who came on my podcast, who said, help one person every day. So that's what HOPE, that acronym is. And I resonate with that a lot. And it was, to me, kind of what my life has been about, is just helping other people. And even through the education, I through the Cost Segregation, I see it like I'm helping people. And I am, because helping people save money on taxes is a great service and a great thing to help people. But going out of your way to make connections, going out of your way to find people who are maybe struggling and see if you can help them either financially or with mentoring or so many different ways. And so that's one thing that I go out of my way to do every single day. And to me, that's kind of my definition of success, is how can I help other people? If I can help other people, you can make sure that you will be helped tremendously. So my faith, and I'm religious, Jewish, Orthodox, Hasidic. There are a lot of different terms for it, whatever. But essentially, what it means is that I have a very close relationship with my faith, with my people, with God, and we see it as our life has a mission. Everyone has a purpose in life, and everyone has a mission. And what that is kind of, we've been given instructions. We have very detailed rules, a rule book, the Torah, which is really an instruction manual, is really what it is. And so a whole code of law that comes along with that. So a lot of religious kind of practices that we do on a daily basis, but a lot of it has to do with just, interpersonal interactions. Like, how do we treat other people? Like, how do business dealings and the like. And so it really allows you to open yourself up to a spiritual or metaphysical world that is there. That, again, going back to what we were talking about before, like cost seg, kind of the analogy and education, you don't know what you don't know. And so the more you open yourself up to learn, the more you realize how little you know. And so when you're in the face of, infinite, God, there's no end to knowledge. And so there's no end to that relationship either. So to me, that's become a very solid component of, obviously who I am, what I do, how I act and conduct myself in business, and through all the interactions I have as well.
Yeah, I can attest. When I reached out to you to be a guest on the show, you actually asked, and I said, what are a couple podcasts I could listen to? And you mentioned a few, but then you also were like, please let me know if I can connect you with anyone. And, I can attest that like you live by what you're saying, and it's pretty awesome. I think it's a great way to live. I wanted to jump into a quick fire round if you've got time here. Real quick, your favorite Twitter account?
Ooh.
Aside from your own.
I can't pick favorites. You can't put me on this spot. There's so many anonymous accounts. And that's what fascinates me about Twitter more than any other platform. Like every other platform, it's social media. These are people that you know. And so there's a connection there. And so Twitter, to me, it's a little bit strange that there's so many anonymous accounts, because you don't really know who the person on the other side of that profile is. And so to me, it's hard to have a favorite in terms of that, because even if it's someone that I maybe like their content, like Strip Mall guy is just amazing, right? His content is just incredible, but I don't know who the guy is, right? I'd love to get to know him. Maybe I do, and he's just stringing me along. It's quite possible that I do know him. But again, it's hard to kind of say that because I don't want to necessarily give a favor to someone that I wouldn't necessarily, connect with in real life.
Yeah, there's so many good ones out there. Second one, most impactful book.
From a business perspective, I think the most impactful book would have to be the 7 Habits that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, awesome. And then you kind of mentioned it, but what does success mean to you?
Just helping other people. If I can, success is not financial whatsoever. And one thing that I've learned from, and again, I asked a similar question on my show, and the vast majority of people answer this not with regards to finances or a number, which is fascinating to me, but rather they answer in terms of impact, or how can I do for other people, or how can I have more control of my time. And so finance and wealth, monetary wealth, is only a means to an end, right? Is really how to give back and how to help other people.
That's a great place to end it here, Yonah. I really appreciate your time. It's been awesome talking to you. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you who want to reach out and learn more about you, or learn more about cost segregation?
You can find me on all the social platforms we mentioned up until now. You can also go to yonahweiss.com.
Yeah, and I'd encourage everybody to check out your podcast. I had fun researching it and listening to quite a few. It's a really good show, and you've got great guests, and you're a great host too. So anyway, thanks a lot for your time today, Yonah. I appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate you, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we would really appreciate it if you subscribe to the podcast feed using the link here on the screen. This really helps support the show so that we can continue to provide this content to you for free. We appreciate you being listeners, and I hope to see you again next time.
3 units, it was totally bombed out, vacant, no roof, no windows, nothing. We bought it for $5,000, invested about $230,000. A year into it, kind of quit my job, started doing that full time. So it was most days just, walking or driving up to the building, working all day and then going home. And it turned out great. I think we sometimes look back and like, how did we do such a nice job on the first one?